It's an honor to be on the Bima with you all and you all on Zoom on this day of Yom Kippur. I am a middle-aged, on the shorter side, with black and graying hair, second-generation Chinese American, and my pronouns are she and her. What comes to your mind when I say the following names? Columbia University, UC Berkeley, CBS, ABC, the Washington Post, the Supreme Court, the Democratic Party. What comes to my mind is how easily and quickly leaders in these institutions failed to stand their ground against rising authoritarianism and opted instead to sell out in favor of self-preservation and increased power and resources. Every time I see another institution collude or capitulate to power like this, I feel a pit in my stomach. Does anyone else feel that? And I have learned that if I am not careful, it will continue to grow because the crappy things are not stopping. They just keep coming. And this is what fascism wants. It wants us all to have these ever-growing pits of despair become so big in us that we give up. It wants us to be overwhelmed by our circumstances and to freeze. And it wants us to stop fighting. We can't let that happen. Historians and political analysts say that we are 1 year away from completely sliding into authoritarianism unless we find a way to stop it. So we have to find our fight. And the good thing is, we all have an antidote to fascism. Last night, we learned one of those was love. We also have access to something inside us that can make this pit smaller and maybe even dissolve it. And that antidote is courage. After leading an organization and building out the reproductive justice movement and working with social change leaders for 2 decades, I have a few things that I would like to share about what I've learned about courage. The Hebrew term for courage is ometz, or ometz lev, which literally means strength or heart strength. Ometz is a core Jewish spiritual and ethical trait with which each of us is innately endowed as human beings formed in the divine image. And when we are fearful or anxious, we can access the quality of ometz lev in any given moment. Jews have been calling on their courage to fight against anti-Semitism for thousands of years. And in the history of this country, Jews have been using their courage to advocate for social change and civil rights. Now, when we think about courage, what often comes to mind first are the acts of courage with a big C, like the heroic risks taken by people like Rosa Parks or activists now who are acting as a human shield between ICE and at-risk communities. But I want to focus our attention on what I call courage with a small c, the everyday acts of courage. These acts of courage can look like bringing people together who are deeply polarized to have constructive, generative conversations that result in new understandings and new solutions. An everyday act of courage can include making a difficult decision to make a sacrifice for the greater good. It can also look like holding your ground and standing firm based on your values when others around you are not. And as a result, you are facing pushback or isolation. These may seem like less significant acts than the courage with a big C, but imagine if those leaders of those institutions that I named at the beginning were practicing these kinds of everyday acts of courage. We would be in a different place right now. Now, I know some of you may be responding internally to yourself, well, yeah, I hear you, and sure, there are times when I have felt the fear and have done things anyway. But when the moment calls, will I be courageous enough for these times? I know I have thought that often. But courage is a muscle we build. And there are many ways to build this muscle. And one of those ways is the practice of teshuvah, as Rabbi Sam, I don't know where they are, mentioned and helped us focus on. I want to talk about teshuvah as a way to find our courage by turning and returning to ourselves, turning towards our families, and turning towards communities under threat. Almost everything in the news today is beyond our control. But through the practice of teshuvah, we can reclaim what is within reach. We can turn inward in this face of danger and volatility and ask, how do I want to show up in these times? We can come back to what we innately carry in our core as anchors during this time. In 2019, at a leadership convening I led for social justice leaders, I asked the group of leaders in the room to share what they were doing to resist Trump. And Daranisha Duncan Boyd proclaimed, "I will not let them take away my joy." As an unapologetic Black trans woman, Daranisha faced many challenges in her life, including sexual violence, workplace and housing discrimination, and exclusion from church and community. When she started her organization, the Take Resource Center for Trans People of Color in Birmingham, Alabama, she did not let protests or death threats stand in her way of opening this critical nonprofit. And Take Now not only serves trans women in Alabama, but also works with women coming from neighboring states. Daranisha has used her incredible gifts and talents to continue to grow her vision. But what I am continually struck with is how even with all of the attacks on trans communities, she is still maintaining her composure and equanimity. I checked in with her after the 2024 elections, and when I asked her how she was doing, she immediately replied, hearing the concern in my voice, "I'm doing well. I have my community, and we have been preparing and will continue to prepare for what is to come. So I am doing well." What would it mean if we took a lesson from Daranisha and decided that our purpose during these times was to refuse to let the powers that be take away our individual and collective joy? a joy that is ours to help, that comes from our heart, a joy that is unconditional. How can we connect to other heart qualities to help us get through these moments, like love, gratitude, our innate dignity? One of my goals right now is to connect with joy and find it in the daily moments, whether I'm brushing my teeth or I'm in meetings or when I'm grocery shopping. And I'm finding that in doing so, my nervous system feels a little bit better and I can act with more clarity and strength. Along with deep personal reflection and resolve, Teshuvah teaches us to turn and return to one another, to repair, to listen, and to stay connected, even in times of division or fractures. My extended multi-generational family probably looks like many of yours, including Holocaust survivors, Zionists, and anti-Zionists. And we've had to navigate painful conversations about what is happening in Israel and in Palestine. Conversations that have left people feeling unheard, disrespected, threatened in their identities, and afraid that these disputes might break the ties that bind us. And there was a time when I wasn't sure if the rupture would become too large to overcome as the painful conversations continued. And then the high holidays arrived this year, and I realized that we were still holding fast, even amongst our differences. So much so that we end up getting together and celebrating Rosh Hashanah twice to accommodate conflicting schedules in our family so that we could be together. And my daughters took time off from their work and their lives and made it a priority to spend that time with their grandparents. So what makes that possible? I believe it's courage. Courage from my daughters who are staying true to their values while still having difficult and painful conversations that are hard for themselves, hard for their grandparents, and still returning to the table again and again. Courage from their grandparents as they listened and read and started to shift. Over time, they have begun to see the violence as a genocide and to question leaders and policies they had once defended. The courage of my partner and I to continue to hold a container for all parties to lean in and to figure out how to make it work together. We first learned how to use this muscle decades ago when we came out to our parents, who initially were a bit challenged in accepting our relationship. But we kept looking for signs of change, and when we saw them, we leaned in, and they then had the courage to respond in kind. Perhaps it is this kind of grappling that we did with each other over time that enables us as a family to continue to have conversations and keep turning towards each other. And I understand that at times families aren't able to come together because of really difficult dynamics or harm that is happening or for reasons simply out of our control. And in these times, it is the courageous thing to take a break and to separate and to take care of ourselves. Teshuvah is more than remorse. Let it be a process of constantly looking for the openings in ourselves, for the openings in each other, that help us move away from fear and self-protection towards the truth and reality of what is in front of us so that we can clearly see and address the root causes of oppression and suffering. Along with turning inwards within ourselves and turning towards each other, we can use Teshuvah to turn towards communities who are in peril in this moment. A friend of mine in the East Coast works behind the scenes in a social change organization in the accounting office. She is infuriated by the ICE kidnappings and wants to do something to stop them, but she hasn't done anything yet because she is scared. She is a single parent and is afraid of getting arrested and leaving her kids by themselves. And even though the rationale is totally understandable, she still feels shame that her fear of risking her family's safety, who has middle-class privilege, is keeping her from taking action for something she deeply believes in and knows could literally help save lives. But one day, she was invited by a friend of a friend to attend a gathering of over 200 people at her local community church. And they were all interested in stopping ICE. And she went with some trepidation because she was positive that she wasn't going to be able to contribute much. But there she learned about the tracking community, or committee. And before she knew it, she had signed up for that committee to be part of it. And since then, she spends a few hours a month walking in her community to map the current routes of ICE and to help gather other fellow accountants and IT folks who create rapid response systems in their neighborhoods to report ICE sightings. And she has since learned that there are many options to resisting ICE, and she sees all the ways that people like her can engage, including adopting a corner and working with day laborers to educate them about their rights, volunteering as a human school bus to walk neighborhood kids to school while their parents, who are at risk of being picked up by ICE, can be less exposed, or pressuring local city councils to ban contracts with Flock Safety, a surveillance technology company that places illegal surveillance cameras at busy intersections across this country, including in the Bay Area, and shares its data with local, state, and federal enforcement agencies, including ICE. Teshuvah helps us build our muscle of courage by turning towards ourselves, turning towards each other, and turning towards communities in need as we find our purpose in these times. How do we want to show up in the face of adversity for ourselves? How can we help one another in our families and in this Kahila community, bridge through polarizing discussions that move towards generative solutions and a collective understanding of not only ending genocide, but to support a path for Palestinian liberation and freedom? On Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Dev likened the earthquake that early morning as the Earth's signal for us to wake up. Wake up to something unexpected, even if you are not ready for it, even if you didn't plan for it, even if you don't control it, even when you don't want it. As we heed Rabbi Dev's call to awaken, let us also accompany it with action, because your courage matters, and our courage matters. Let us step into our courage and respond when communities are under attack and need us to stand and fight with them. Trans communities, Black communities, Palestinian communities, poor and working class communities, people with disabilities, undocumented refugee and immigrant communities. And I know many of us sit in the intersection of these communities. And in these times, almost any moment can be an opportunity to avoid giving in to despair and choosing courage instead, whether it's courage with a big C or courage with a small c. And we don't have to do it alone, because courage is a collective practice. Let's use it to resist, to fight, to block, to hold the line against authoritarianism and fascism. Let's use it to pivot and not rebuild what is falling apart around us, because that's not working. Let's use it to envision and create a future that truly aligns with our values and includes the liberation of all people and our planet. Thank you.
Amen, amen. On your